Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Trivett, and I'm an archivist. And this is another episode of An Archivist Tale, a podcast created by my husband, Jeff Huth, and me. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Karen.
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm doing pretty well today.
In COVID land?
In COVID land, I call it Pandemic Central.
Exactly.
Pandemic Central. We're coming to you from Manhattan, from the very bottom of the island of Manhattan.
New York.
New York. There are other Manhattans. I've heard of other Manhattans. We'll talk about them if it comes up.
It is Saturday, April 11th, 2020, and it is 3:08 in the afternoon, Eastern Daylight Time.
Nice. She really wants you to know the time.
Coordinates, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. So where are we?
We are at 1 West Street, again at the bottom of the island of Manhattan in New York City. And it's interesting to be living here at this time.
It is. And so we have a guest.
We definitely have a guest. We are so thrilled to have discovered Riverside.fm. It allows us to continue our podcast, add series to the library, and we are thrilled today to have a very special guest, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself.
Sure. My name is Cliff Hight. I'm the head of special collections and the University Archivist at Kansas State University.
Located?
Oh, yeah. The other Manhattan. And people in the town affectionately call it the Little Apple. So.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us, Cliff.
We're the Big Apple, by the way.
Yeah, well. So, Cliff, let's just dive in, and I'll ask you the first of two questions we ask. Otherwise, the conversation just develops organically. Tell us, what is your archivist origin story?
Oh, yeah.
So that's a really good question. And I want to say a couple of things before I dive into that.
Please.
So I am, first I want to say thanks for letting me be part of the podcast. I feel kind of honored to do that. And the second thing is I also want to say happy birthday to my dad because he's 86 today. So
wow.
So there you go.
Wonderful.
Thanks for the birthday present, I guess.
Nice.
So
where is he?
So he is in Brigham City, Utah, which is northern Utah.
Gotcha.
For those So I'll call him later and let him know that he might be able to find this someday. So
yes, later today.
Right.
Pretty soon.
So I guess in a way that's a little bit of an archivist origin story, right? You need parents to be able to get here. So
absolutely.
I also wanted to point out that my origin story, it includes elements of privilege, even while working through different challenges that come from living. So I wanted to point that out, that I recognize some of my origins involve some of those events. But from the time I was young, I've been fairly curious as an individual and interested in a lot of topics. You can read that as like nerdiness. Okay, fine. That's probably what it was. But as I continued reading, I started to focus on histories and reading histories of people and places and events. And so that continued through much of my education. When I was in college, I eventually had to figure out what my major was going to be. And I was first at a junior college and decided while I was there that, hey, history is the field for me. So I selected that as my major, and then didn't really know exactly what my career options were going to be, but I just knew that was going to be the major, right? So that probably is not too unusual. They just pick a major and figure out what they're going to do later. Mm-hmm. And so as my mom was talking with one of her cousins about my choice, he actually suggested archives as a possibility. And so the summer after I finished my being at the junior college, they actually paid me to do a little bit of part-time work and with their historical records, which basically meant they had a storage closet that had some filing cabinets and some shelves in it. And they the challenge was I didn't have any training, any professional guidance. They just let me loose. And yeah, after doing that for a little while, I became rather bored, and I just found myself losing focus and a little bit of adrift. And so I started to rethink this whole archives thing, because I thought, man, if this is what it's like every day, I don't
Oh, great.
Don't worry, it's worse, Cliff. It's much worse.
Right. So as I went on to work on my bachelor's degree, I thought, well, maybe I'm going to be a history professor. That's what I want to do. And I had a really good advisor who was on the history faculty, and this is a guy who had gone to Yale and Harvard, and I thought he was really like a brilliant instructor and just was really good. And he was wise enough to share his experience of getting that position, and said that there were so many applicants, and I think it was in the hundreds of applicants, and he was hired. And so I thought, at an institution of this size, there were that many applicants. That means there are a lot of people with PhDs in history that aren't quite in the field where they want to be. And so
interesting guess.
Right. My powers of deduction were slightly growing in my life. So I happened to be talking with the University Archivist there, John Silito, at Weber State University. And I was doing some research on a history paper and happened to start talking to him. And so he started to nudge me again towards this idea of archives might be a good place for you if this is your interest. So, and over time, as I finished up my education there, he really became like an unimposing mentor. He didn't like force any of those opinions, but he just gently nudged me every once in a while about it. And I think I can point to him as really my mentor of getting me into the field. So I applied for graduate school, ended up doing an internship at the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Oh, wow.
The summer before I started at the University at Albany, which all three of us are alums of that program.
Correct.
So yeah, that really got me started and got me down the path, and I've remained involved in various ways since then.
Wow, so interesting.
Yeah.
Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
We've actually interviewed somebody who worked there as well, another person.
Wow.
Who knew? How did you get to Albany?
Yeah.
Albany, New York is not that close to Utah. I know because I've driven from Albany to Utah.
I have too. And I will say, when we moved out to New York, our oldest child was about 2-3 weeks old. Oh. Don't drive across the country when you have a child that age. I'm just going to offer that suggestion.
Wow. Okay.
So did you choose UAlbany, or did it choose you in some fashion?
I think I was contemplating a couple of different schools at the time, because I had, again, John, my mentor at Weber State, had said, you should get 2 master's degrees. Therefore, you'll be more marketable in the university archive settings. And so I was seeking a program that had a dual master's option, so that I could get a history master's degree as well as the archive side degree. So I had applied at a couple of different schools, and once I got the internship at the Hall of Fame, I thought, well, I don't really want to move twice within a 4-month period. Mm-hmm. So I settled on UAlbany, and it worked out well.
Nice.
Wow. Interesting. While I was there, I started working on a history degree as well, but separately. And then I said, I got 2 children. And I don't want to finish the last 2 courses.
So what part of history captures you?
Ooh, I'd probably say, so when I was more focused on the history side, I was interested in predominantly American history, also some Latin American history. Mm. And within American history, it seemed to focus more on like Civil War era was one, but then also 20th century. And then I started to get more involved in like social and cultural history and thinking about those areas. And so I've ended up, maybe it's that natural curiosity thing, but I end up going a lot of different directions with those different topics, but those have been some of the main ones.
But always with the goal of becoming a practicing archivist.
Yeah, once I settled on that, it was more in that realm. Like when I was in the UAlbany program for history, I took some public history classes as well because I just thought that was a good blend with the archives courses I was taking as well.
Right.
How was Ivan Steen?
He actually was my thesis advisor for
Wow.
my history degree. So
Wow.
yeah. So I ended up writing about a guy named August Herman who was involved in baseball administration in the first part of the 20th century, and he had been in Cincinnati, Ohio, was where he was based, and there was a lot of city politics going on, and that's Ivan Steen's, like, that was his area. And so he made sure as I was writing my thesis, you have to include some of this stuff about bosses. Yeah, it was great.
Very good. So after your graduate degree, where did your path take you?
Right. So I was able to work on a grant-funded project at the Hall of Fame that occurred. It was about a year and a half after I had finished my internship. I came back to the Hall of Fame and worked there, and it was on the August Herman papers. Was why I started going down that path of learning more about him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked there on that project, helped with some other things, ended up working with some other interns and helping them understand, the at the time EAD was the hot thing. And so we were doing some EAD work then, and were able to help train some interns to have those experiences as well. Mm-hmm. But then, as with most grant funded projects, the money eventually runs out.
I noticed.
Oh, yeah.
So you got to go find, like a real job, right? So I had to play that game of how do I get another position elsewhere? And I ended up taking a position in Canyon City, Colorado, which is about 45 minutes southwest of Colorado Springs, for those of you that have been in the state. And I was at the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center, which is a long name for basically a local historical society. Where we focused on both the curatorial museum side as well as the manuscript and records side. So I was there for 4.5 years. We were able to do a number of different projects there, especially related to exhibits and other things like that, trying to improve. We started or expanded a little bit more of an oral history program and transitioned to digital with our oral history there. And so and then I ended up being at Kansas State University, and I started there in 2011. So I'm at 9 years of being there.
Wow, you did pretty well.
Yeah.
There's been some privilege, every once in a while I realize, wow, there have been a lot of things that have worked out. So
yeah.
So, I mean, when I went to school at UAlbany, I was the only person who got, I think they called it a fellowship, but what I got to do was process papers. So everybody else was going to class, and I was going to class, and I was processing papers. And so nobody else had actually worked with records, but I was working with records every week, half of my time. So I understood things more than they did. And when we came into classes, people would say, well, why would they throw that away? You should keep this. And I said, boy, you really can't keep everything. I mean, honestly, you can't. But how did I get my job? I got my job. The only reason I got that job was I had graduated from Vanderbilt University. That was it. There was nothing else. They knew virtually nothing about me except for that.
Oh, wow.
I said, oh, okay, well, it was good because there was a kid to feed, and we needed some more money, so it worked out. But it's crazy. So yeah, there will be things like that help you.
Right.
So when you entered at Kansas State, what was your role?
So I started as the University Archivist at the time, and the way that the department had existed previously was that there was one person who was the University Archivist and the curator of manuscripts. So he was playing both of those roles. Way more than one person can reasonably do, So he stayed on as the curator of manuscripts, and then I came in as the University Archivist, which ended up being pretty helpful because he was able to then provide some institutional memory as I started to settle in as the University Archivist. And so I really appreciated his willingness to help us out with that.
What do you remember as some of your first obstacles to clear?
Ooh.
She's got a lot of questions today.
That's a really good question. So when I started, we did not have an archival collection management system.
Mm-hmm.
It had just been maintained either in paper files or the descriptions were in Word documents, HTML files, other ways of trying to provide those descriptions, but there wasn't a cohesive program that was managing all of that. And so that was one of the things I did in that first year or so, as I worked with everybody else in the department to try and get a sense of what are the bells and whistles that you would like in a program.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved toward setting, figuring out which one we wanted to use and then going in that direction. And so we initially chose Archon, which a number of people in the archives world would be familiar with. And so that would have been in 2011, 2012-ish, right in that time period when we started getting it set up and started to get records into it. But we did it with the understanding that it was a short-term fix. We knew that wasn't the long-term solution because of the developments that were happening with archive space, which was they were just talking about it at that point, starting to get the framework in place for it. So we knew going in that wasn't our long-term solution, but that's what we intended at that point, was to at least get something up, and then we could migrate out of that into a new system at some point. So that was one area. The other thing that I just was thrown into almost immediately is 2013 was going to be our sesquicentennial anniversary starting at Kansas State University. So I got thrown into the planning committee for that, and Tony Crawford was the curator who had continued on. And so he and I ended up co-authoring a photographic history of the university within those first couple of years. So that was out in 2013. And so that was another pretty big project that we got thrown into.
I'll say.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Cliff, during your education, what was the greatest guest lecture you had?
Oh. This is probably a loaded question.
I almost beat you to that by mentioning it. I was talking about Albany, but I'm glad. So Jeff and I have known each other for a number of years, for those of you who aren't aware, and we've bantered back and forth trying to figure out when the first time was that we may have crossed paths. And so I went and looked last night in some of my sylvi and papers from when I was in grad school, and I found Phil Eppard's class, class from 2003, the fall of 2003, that Jeff was scheduled to be a guest lecturer on October 1st of 2003. So that is the first time that we crossed paths. So, and I know that Jeff has no memory of me probably from that class, but it was embedded in my brain, the experience of having to be there.
Yeah. So, I don't remember at all. I remember that I was thinking I wasn't like Phil, is what I was thinking, because I had Phil as a teacher. As a matter of fact, I was his first student, meaning in his first year, before he saw any other student, I showed up because I said, I got to have a job. I got to go see him. I know I'm sick with a cold, but I have to start to, make connections so that I understand things and I know what I can do. So I was his first student, but he taught a totally opposite of any way I would teach.
Yeah.
For instance, where were the jokes? And so that's what I thought of. But it was a good time. I confirmed it last night too by looking at my CV, and I never thought, geez, Jeff, you have all this detail. It must be in there. And then there it was. So now we know, and so this is good for posterity.
Yes.
But more importantly, we want to think about other things that you've done in your life. More important things than one class. And one thing that's important to, well, sort of all of us, is the Archives Leadership Institute. All of us have attended one version of it, different versions of it. I've attended actually all the ones you guys have as well. Yeah. And so I was in the first one because I'm always first, at least today, nothing else. But so just tell me what it's like to you, and also tell us how you would define whatever the Archives Leadership Institute is. Because not everybody knows what it is. I only have a vague idea.
Well, I think there's been a definition given in the Dictionary of Archives Terminology that is forthcoming at the end of this month, for those of you who are anxiously awaiting that. And so that's probably a better definition than what I'll say, but I'll give my version. That's fine.
I can look it up on my phone because I think I wrote it, but go on.
So the Archives Leadership Institute is a program that's funded by the National Historical Records Preservation Commission. Did I get all those right?
Publications.
Anyhow, NHPRC, whatever the order of words is for that acronym, that's what it is.
Historical Records and Publications.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
They've funded that for a long time at this point. And it's basically a way for archivists to get an intensive experience in developing leadership skills in various ways and thinking differently about leadership and how they can then go back to their institutions and strengthen their institutions, and also how they can continue to strengthen the profession as a whole with leadership development. So that's my definition on the fly.
Okay, so you went to one. What happened?
I did. Would you like to know more about it?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So 2014 was the year that I attended. I was at one of the Luther College experiences in Decorah, Iowa, and for me, it was really, I really appreciated the experience that I had there. I was really pleased to interact with so many good archivists as well as good people that were there. And I had some really positive experiences that helped build friendships. It also, another component of it was it helped reassure me that this was a good profession for me to be participating in and continuing to be involved in. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think that's a really core underlying idea for me about what ALI has been. And one of the benefits that I've seen in the years since then is a lot of unofficial mentoring and support that we've been able to give each other throughout the years from the people that participated in it. And hopefully that's been a two-way relationship where people who have given me good advice and good thoughts, I've been able to also help others in the same way as well. So
I hope so.
I have found it a very reciprocal environment. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But by the way, tonight we're going to a virtual cocktail hour with the steering committee of ALI for those 6 years that I was on it. So we're going to have cocktails or whatever. Some people have Pepsi.
Well, and I think the group of faculty and mentors that existed while I was there, I mean, you're all a bunch of great people. So it's been good to interact with many of you.
You do know we don't give grades, right?
That's why, I mean, I feel like I can say those things and not feel like I'm kissing up.
There you go.
Okay, I wish that were true. But that's during this, the virtual cocktail hour reminded me of something, which is that we're in pandemic isolation. I think this is my 27th day of pandemic isolation. I think I've been outside 4 times, and mostly it was to go get groceries, and now I don't even go outside to get groceries. So that's it. Yeah. I went outside to see the USNS Comfort come in and take pictures. So otherwise it's been inside. And what we're kind of interested at this time, and the reason that we actually have this way of recording a podcast now, is because we can't get to people. We
And people
cannot
can't
move.
get to us.
We had to cancel lots of podcasts that we had already scheduled. And so we needed a way to keep doing this. And this has been a good way to do it, because all of a sudden we can reach people who we might say, well, why don't we wait till August? We might see them in Chicago at an archives conference or something like that. And now we can do things a little bit faster.
Yeah.
But in your shop in Manhattan, the more important Manhattan, I should add, what's happened there? How are you doing your work? How have things changed? What kind of solutions have you come up with?
Sure. So I think one important thing that I've noticed is that I think our university leadership they were pretty quick to realize that they needed to do something, take some pretty significant measures. And so we had spring break the week of, like about a month ago. So that second full week in March. And toward the end of that week, as things continued to develop, as the virus spread, they decided that they would delay classes for another week and shift everything to remote instruction after that. And so, which is a huge, you think the logistics of that, there's basically all the classes that don't have a remote element to them suddenly have to shift to a remote element. And so there's a huge load there that the faculty all had to figure out, how do we do this? But I really appreciated that they were that early to recognize that we needed to do something significant to curb the spread. And so that also influenced the libraries, where we made some decisions in the library leadership of being closed down and having people work remotely. And the university they've been really good so far about for people whose work requires materials and they can't really get a lot done remotely, they're still getting paid. And I think that's been something I've really appreciated from them. So then that's kind of background. So anyhow, we transitioned to working from home, which for me, I had to think through. I've done work from home before on a limited scale with a laptop, and you just live with what you have available through the laptop. And knowing that we were probably 2 months at least of not being back on campus, they were kind enough to let us pull a second monitor or a monitor so that we could have a second screen. They were able to let us pull some things that would make our remote work a little bit easier. So I got here, I pulled out an old desk that I hadn't used since I was young. I'd be used by the kids and stuff. And so it was just waiting to be used at this point. So I was able to get that set up. And so the logistics of it, I've just been working, and we've obviously done a lot more video meetings. Zoom seems to be the preferred tool that we use with most of ours. And I've also tried to keep in mind how do we continue to maintain a connection with people within the department, within the libraries as a whole, because there are some people who are in more isolated situations where they don't have other people living in their house with them. And so that can get really, you can start to feel that isolation a lot more. So we've tried to do some things in our department where we started doing weekly check-ins that are just like a 30-minute, it's not work talk really, it's just more like a social time. If people want to talk about things, they can. If they have questions about work stuff, we can talk about that. But and that's worked out pretty well. I've appreciated that. And I've appreciated that other people actually are showing up, that it's not just me by myself. So
that could be boring.
Yeah.
So what have you been able to do?
So for me, I had these grandiose plans. I think a lot of people do. They're like, oh, wow, maybe I can start working on research projects that have been on the back burner for years, And so far that hasn't played out as I had thought that it might. I've still been able to meet pretty consistently with people in the department, and we're able to talk about, like, we're going through a website redesign project that's going to last this year. So that's been something that we've been talking a little bit about. Back in May of 2018, we had a fire on the roof of the library, which results of everything that happened there caused the building to be emptied of people and collections, entire, like, circulating collection, all of our stuff, all of it. So, so we're still planning the return of all of our collections, the return of people. We've opened it in phases, and so there's been a lot of logistical discussions about that, as well as planning for getting our things back in. So that's another thing that takes time. And then because of our current pandemic, there have been some people who have been interested in how K-State did things in 1918 with the influenza pandemic. And so we've been doing some work to share information about the campus closures that happened then, and what some of the strategies were at that point. So those are some other things. I mean, I could drone on for more, but I'll stop for now.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Here's an interesting question. So for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been the only one working. Nobody else is allowed to work except for the one guy who can go to the record center and make sure it hasn't flooded. So he can do that for no more than 30 minutes a week. And so he just goes once a week and checks it out. Otherwise, I'm handling any requests that come into us, and we shut virtually everything else down. We open up on Monday, but we open up at home. So they're just finally saying, okay, now you can do real work. But the interesting thing is I keep getting all these calls, and you should know that I don't hold records. I manage records. I help people manage records. I tell people what to do. We help with large description or processing projects. We do all sorts of stuff like that, but we don't have physical control of records except for our own office files. But I get all these questions from people from courts, not from courts, who have gone to the courts and they've got no answer. And I said, well, there's really nobody at the courts right now. They're empty. And so we're doing virtually everything remotely now. Originally, there were still a few people left in the courts. And I said, and we're focused only on essential work. So it's very unlikely that they will see this as essential and deal with it. And there's nobody to answer the phones. And so you can't do anything. But I was kind of interested that people were still calling, but I think it's because they expect the courts to still operate, which they indeed do, but they operate in a restricted manner. So have you gotten any requests like that you couldn't fill?
Well, so that it is a good question. And we've had those requests since May of 2018 because we haven't had access to. So this is an interesting thing that for us, it was almost like we're just playing deja vu. I mean, that's really what it was like. After the fire, there was a certain amount of time when people were just working remotely until we started to figure out where to plug people into the campus where there were empty spaces so that people could have a workspace there. And so for us, it's almost been like well, we've done this before. We know how to do it again. One thing that we've been able to do is the university asked if there were like mission critical activities that still would require certain people to be allowed to be back on campus for certain amounts of time, and when would that happen? And so I advocated for our assistant university archivist who oversees our reference services to be able to get to campus roughly once a week to manage any type of reference request that would require some of our ready reference materials that we've had in our temporary reading room. So, but yeah, we've gotten used to sharing with people that I'm sorry we don't have access to these records until we're back in the library. And so, yeah, we've had plenty of those types of exchanges, but we've also tried to think creatively about are there other ways that we can push them to our digital and digitized materials and help them at least get some level of detail or some level of answers from what's available there.
Right. I mean, that's how I was able to solve only one request out of quite a handful. But one request, they wanted some records. I said, hey, this case was in play like 3 weeks before the pandemic really shut us down. So it should be online. Have you checked this? Just go check this website, and it should be there. And so that's how we, in one instance, were able to do something.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your assets online for researchers, and if any instruction opportunities have presented themselves.
Yeah. So a number of years ago, not long after I started, we had talked about some different digitization projects in the university, and specifically in the libraries. And so I don't remember what year it happened, but at some point we some people in our metadata department had applied for a grant through, I think it was the Sloan Foundation, if I remember right, to do a mass digitization project that would then be available through the Internet Archive. And so what we did is we focused on our yearbooks, our course catalogs, and our newspapers as the high level, most frequently used holdings that would really be beneficial for people to have access to. And so that was where we started. But since then there have been some books that we've scanned, and there have been some photos, and some different types of reports of different organizations. And so those are all available through, we have a space on Internet Archive for some of the things that are there. We also have our institutional repository that's DSpace-based tool. We call it KREX, which stands for Kansas Research Exchange or something like that. I think that's what it stands for.
Sounds like a heavy metal band.
Yeah, it should be. And then we also have a place on our website where people can find our digital collections.
Very good.
So Cliff, you didn't mention a dictionary. You should tell me about this dictionary. I'm trying to learn about it.
As one who's been involved in the group longer than me, I know you know more than I do about it. But the Dictionary Working Group is the Society of American Archivists, and we're basically really trying to expand on some of the work that's been done previously by, like, Richard Pierce Moses did the glossary, and I think 2005 was when that was last published. And then there have been a number of other people who have done glossaries and dictionaries previously of archival terminology. I got to say, being in part of this group has been probably one of my most fulfilling professional projects. I always look forward to the meetings because it's just a really good group of people, and we're able to have good conversations. We're able to sometimes have some silliness involved, but yet also working on getting things done. And for me, I guess I'd mentioned earlier, it is scheduled to have its initial release on the 29th of April. So I think there's going to be some official publicity about that coming later, but that's a spoiler alert, I guess.
Yeah. You've already spoiled it. It's too late. So this couldn't come out before the notification, I believe.
Yeah. So I hope nobody hears that.
Oh.
We're supposed to hear it.
Yeah. So I know Jeff's involvement with the Dictionary Working Group, but in terms of your involvement, have you had to also, as he has defined terms, and if so, what have been some of the more challenging terms?
Yeah, so I started on the project in like 2015 or 16, maybe, I can't remember, somewhere in that range. And so it really exposed me to lexicography, which I know Jeff was kind enough to share a book about lexicography, which means how you make a dictionary, basically. And I I had not really tried to understand that before. And so it was really helpful it's been really helpful for me to understand how definitions come into being and what it takes to make that happen. And one of the biggest things for me was recognizing that a dictionary isn't, it doesn't make it, my mind just went blank on the right word to use, but it's not proscriptive, it's descriptive. So if people use a term with various meanings, we have to acknowledge all of those various meanings for that term. And my efforts initially, I was doing some of that work, but I also started finding a bunch of sources, because those sources help us have the context that we need to then define the term in its various usages. And for me, I ended up shifting more from the definitional side to more the source side, and I've been much more involved in making sure we've got our sources consistently formatted, making sure that we have enough sources to help define terms. So that's been more my effort.
Nice.
Which has been great, because I sure didn't want to do that part. But no, it's also essential.
Yeah,
it's essential. And by the way, I never learned any bibliographic rules. I always say, well, I think I want this a little bit different. So I'm not really good. So now I have my own style, but I don't think anybody else has it. So it's good for somebody to set the rules, and that way we can have more consistency. Lexicography is a lot like archives, because it's about trying to control information and present it in a way that it can be understood.
Yeah.
That's what we do. So it's good to have a lot of archivists on it, especially with wide experience. So some people know some things, some people know other things, and that way we're able to more clearly define words as we talk about them, and we try to hammer them out.
Yeah, I agree. I think the diversity of experiences has been really fun to hear everybody's different contributions to the group.
So Cliff, tell us a little bit about Archon. Tell us about that trajectory in terms of your archives management system approach.
Sure. So we ended up, as I mentioned earlier, we ended up going with Archon thinking that it was a stopgap, and so we didn't try and dress it up or personalize it very much for our organization. And we realized, as things continued to transpire with archive space, I had some colleagues who were more earlier adopters to that system, but they had a lot more, they had much larger staffing levels. And some of them kept, saying, just hold on, it's not quite ready. I don't jump in yet. And so we kept holding off and kept sticking with Archon and moving forward with that. And then in about 2016 or 2017, we realized, our IT people came to us and said, okay, Archon is built on an earlier version of PHP, and it will no longer be maintained beyond, I think it was the beginning of 2018, if I remember right. And so we knew at that point we had a timeline that we needed to work within to migrate to a new system. So we started testing archive space and also access to memory, or ATOM, which is a program that Artifactual has taken over the development of. They also do Archivematica. So we worked within both of those to kind of test and see which one we liked better. We even worked with Archive Space to develop an updated migration tool out of Archon. And as we continue to see how things were working out, we just had some concerns about the way that A-Space interacted, and the way that like staff members expected it to interact. And so after we talked about different options, we eventually settled on migrating to ATOM. And part of that was because we already had Archivematica as part of our digital preservation process, and saw the two as being more easily unified in workflows and other factors. So we went down that ATOM path, and it was an interesting experience to go through that migration, because there wasn't a tool that existed that could easily pull things out and magically drop it in.
Really?
They had some good templates in Atom, but we had to massage it a little bit to make it work. And one of our sysadmin systems administrators from IT, from the library's IT department, he did great work to make that migration as seamless as possible, without me, causing too many problems.
About how many finding aids are we talking about in terms of the migration?
Right. So it seems like I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but it was probably, the descriptive records were probably over 100, but then there were also all of the accession records,
right,
and the location information, and there were a few other tables from the database that we had to figure out how to make them land well together in the new system. And so that's been part of that process.
Excellent. And your work with Atom has developed from that of an end user to a different kind of participation. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. That's a good leading question, Karen.
Yeah.
Some of you may or may not know that Karen is on the board of directors or the board of trustees. I don't remember which name it is.
Directors, I guess.
For the Atom Foundation, which is an entity that was developed with the idea of establishing version 3 of Atom, which is basically a rebuild of the system based on current standards and current technologies. And so when we saw the announcement that they were creating this Atom Foundation, we had talked it over in our area, and we decided we wanted to be members to help contribute to it. So we provided that monetary support and have continued to remain members. And then because it's so widely used outside of the U.S., we thought also it would be good to have some sort of U.S. Involvement of ways that we can make sure that like DAX, our standard is part of the new system. And so I volunteered at one point as they put out a call for the roadmap committee, which basically that's the group of people that are going to establish some of the framework of the parameters for the development of version 3. I just decided I'd throw my hat into that ring, and I don't know what they were thinking, but they decided to. So I'm part of that roadmap committee, and happy to be aboard that. And Karen's one of the co-chairs of it. So
yeah, can't be happier than I am that you're a part of it. So thank you for being a volunteer.
Well, and I will say also one thing that influenced us and in our pursuit of Atom or not, looking at the Fashion Institute of Technology's instance of Atom that you've overseen, and looking at how you've got a very visual collection that's really really fun, and it's laid out well. And so even though ours doesn't have quite the same visual appeal, it was something that influenced us about, okay, these are ways that digital assets can be used within it as they interact with Archivematica. So good work. Thanks for helping us out with that.
Hey, happy to do it. So I'm curious, in terms of Atom and your use, how have you developed your authority records?
Ooh, we have not done a lot on that yet. And that's one of the interesting things. So this migration, I think I was wrong on the timeline. I think we migrated after the fire. So it was in 2018 to do the migration. I think it was by the end of 2018 that we had to be done. And so that's been one of the hangups for us, is we could migrate all the data, but verifying that it's accurate with the actual collections, we have to kind of say, well, we think it is, but it's on hold until we can actually have access to the holdings.
Right. So that's been part of our, we feel like we're in the middle of migration still, because we still need to have the physical materials. Sure.
But despite that, we're still trying to figure out, okay, what what do we want our templates to look like?
Mm-hmm.
What are the standards that we have in our organization for when do we go to which degree of description with a collection? So we're working a little bit more on that side.
Gotcha. Great. Well, I'm looking forward to our meeting on Friday.
Good.
It explains also why it's so easy for you to work from home. Without any collections, it becomes,
oh boy,
non-essential to ever go to work.
Mm.
The interesting thing that I thought of during this conversation is, and it's because when I found out, I don't remember if Karen told me that you were joining the Adam team first, or I saw it on the ICA, listserv, the International Council on Archives. I never know the preposition. On Archives. They sent out in their email their listserv an announcement about this, and I said, oh, that was good. But what this is making me think of is ICA got canceled. ICA is taking place in November, and we plan to go. We didn't have reservations yet, but we planned to go.
Yeah.
Karen actually submitted a paper. And so we were expecting that would be okay because it was in November, but that has been canceled. And so what it makes me think is that the Society of American Archivists might be canceled because guess what? The MARAC is supposed to be going on right now. The Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference is supposed to be going on right now. It was canceled. In June, the New York Archives annual New York Archives Conference, is supposed to, she's whispering so nobody can was supposed to be on too. And I thought, well, maybe in June it'll be okay, cancel. And so it's going to be interesting because SAA brings so many archivists together.
Yeah.
It's such a big thing. And it's really the time that we see most of our friends. We don't see them all the rest of the time. And so this year it might not happen. And the other thing is, what happens to these archival associations? How do they survive financially is going to be a big question because they're not running on fat and lard.
No, not at all. And I think that's similarly with Midwest Archives Conference. Their annual meeting was scheduled to be in early May in Iowa, and I was planning to go there and everything, and they had to cancel that. And I know the Western Archivist meeting that was going to be in California was canceled, and that was going to be, I think, later this month, if I remember right.
Wow.
Right.
So, and as I've thought about it, I've wondered if there's some need to rethink how we do what the financial model even looks like in some regards. Can they transition to more of a virtual environment in a way that's going to be financially sustainable? I don't know. I mean, because I've wondered, I've participated in enough Zoom calls at this point. We ended up doing a webinar with the ACRL, which is the Association for College and Research Libraries. It's a part of ALA. They had invited a colleague of mine here in the libraries, and he asked me to join in to talk about moving to remote reference because we had already done it with the fire. A lot of people were like, okay, how do we do this?
Yeah.
And so we were able to talk to, I think we had 350 attendees.
Wow.
On Zoom. And so they were able to manage that many different people for an hour-long presentation. So is that something that we need to be thinking about, is how do we shift to maybe delivering things differently, because travel budgets are going to be challenging for most places for a while. So I don't know. I don't have the only answer on this, or an answer.
Well, and I don't either, but it makes me think about all of my colleagues who can rarely go to conferences because they don't get institutional support. And this could generate a rethinking of how the content's delivered,
right,
in a more affordable model.
Yeah, and that's where I think would the trade-off be enough? Would they get more support from people doing it remotely who would like to participate at a reasonable price than having it on site that requires so many more resources to get them there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then, like you were saying earlier, Jeff, that's where a lot of us, that's like one of the few times we see each other in a year.
I know.
And do we miss out as a result of that? So,
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is the thing, because people want to have remote conferences, and I understand that financially it's hard. I've spent a lot of my career paying for any conference I've gone to. Yet of the conferences we mentioned canceled, 2 of them I was going to speak at. 2 of them Karen was planning to speak at as well. So there's a lot that we do, but the reason I go to conferences is to see people and to be with people and to learn from them that way. And we can do it this way. We're not saying we can't, but we're only 3 folks right now. And so you can be in a room with 20 people and move around and have conversations with different people if you want to, but you can't say, okay, everybody's going to have to be quiet so I can speak to all 19 of you.
Right.
And that's really how this model works. We can talk over each other a little bit, but it's going to be an interesting thing, because I don't think I believe in having digital solutions. As a matter of fact, the Society of American Archivists has broadcast live some sessions. I've had people, comment on sessions that I was speaking in while I was there. So, and I think that's good to have that option. But at the same time, we have to have some option where we can see each other as flesh and bone and blood human beings.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I agree that. And some of this goes back to even my my archival education, or I guess it wasn't archival. It was what was the name of the class? It was like the intro to library science or information science, I think is what it was called then.
I know that one.
601.
Yeah. And we read The Social Life of Information, as you may have read at some point. But that book talked a lot about that human element matters. I mean, we can't expect people to work remotely forever, because that human interaction still has to take place. There's information that moves in those interactions that won't move in any other way sometimes. So
right.
So I agree. There still has to be some way to have people interact.
Right, but keep in mind this: we don't know when we're getting out of this pandemic.
Yeah.
We do not know when it's going to happen. I know we're going to go deep into May in our job. It's just pretty clear from everything the governor says and everything we're hearing from our people.
Yeah.
And we don't know if other outbreaks will get worse in different parts of the country. We don't know what's going to happen. And so it could be a while. And because it's a novel virus, that means, people don't know anything about it. It doesn't have the normal features of things that we're familiar with. They expect it'll take 2 years to have some antiviral, solution to this. So what's like I think I might have to leave the apartment sometime in the next year.
And that's something that we've at Kansas State University right now. All the rest of this semester is remote, and then they do an intersession set of courses, and then summer school. And I think officially it's going to be announced fairly soon that those are going to be all online. And I mean, there's been some talk. People in the athletics side, they're wondering about fall sports and if those are even going to happen, because summer is when they do a lot of prep for that. So if they're not prepared, it's not smart for us to just throw them into fields of competition and without being prepared for it. And like you're saying, when fall semester comes, what does that mean? Will we still be remote then even? So yeah, a lot of questions still remain unanswered.
I have a question that remains.
Good.
And that is, you mentioned being moved by human beings earlier. What moves you and keeps you passionate about the work you do?
That's a good question. As I, for me, it's probably three main issues that have some sub issues in it that I've been thinking about with that. And one of it does have to do with humans and the world around us. And just a basic perspective that I have is I think that we have the power to change ourselves for good,
Mm-hmm.
and to influence the world around us to become better. I recognize when I say that the inverse is just as true, that people can choose to do great damage to themselves, to other humans, to the world. And so part of what draws me to archives and keeps me engaged is they hold the evidence of those activities. They allow us to see the documentation, even of the worst things as well as some of the best, and we can then draw from that to figure out how to become better, to ourselves, to those around us, and to the world at large. So that's one fundamental thing that draws me to archives and keeps me engaged. As somebody who works at a public institution, another facet for me is the justice and accountability component that I think is important to archival work. And some of that within the last, I'd say 5 or 10 years, I've especially, my understanding of justice has evolved quite a bit in that time. And I see things a lot differently now than I did when I was younger. And I feel like that's been something that I've seen the role of archives helping us to hold people accountable, but also to seek for greater justice for those that have not had it, for various reasons. So, and then I think the third one for me, it's kind of it's recognizing the connections that archives bring, whether it's it's throughout the organization. So sometimes it's interpersonal. When I have the opportunity to work with other people, there's an interpersonal connection even outside of the records themselves, and that can be with instructors or students or administrators or other people, other colleagues, where there's just an opportunity to bond as humans because of archives and history and the records that are maintained in those archives. I also think there's a structural component to it where we can help influence policy development in ways that can reflect a more just world and other things like that. Understanding the information systems that maintain our records so that we can ensure that the right ones get preserved over time. That's another facet to me that's structural. And then the ability to create relationships and partnerships with other campus units where we can work on a project and then know, hey, we worked on this project together. We've got this other project, and they'd be a great resource to help accomplish that work. And then the final connection for me is with the records themselves. And I'm sure all of you have had the experience of seeing people working with records and having those eureka moments where they resonate. There's something in that record that really just connects with them. And so there's the informational epiphany side. But then there's also the connecting to family sometimes. And in my case, at least, I've had a number of times when people have come in seeking information about a relative of theirs. And so there's a way that they can better connect with that person that they maybe didn't know very well through the records themselves. Mm-hmm. And then I've had the personal experience myself when I'm answering a reference question or when I'm curious about some topic in the institution's history, and I start learning about it and learning about the people, and where I feel like there's a connection to that individual or that event where I go, oh, wow, either, I've experienced something similar, or I can only imagine how difficult this was for them. So for me, that all of those factors help keep me engaged in archives.
It sounds great.
Yes. Thank you so much, Cliff, for being with us today.
You bet. I've really appreciated that the time has moved by very quickly, and I've appreciated
It always does.
It does. And so now we're going to say goodbye to the audience. That brings us to the end of another episode of An Archivist Tale. However, we will even have an episode next week. So we are still producing our podcast. We're still getting information out there. We're even trying to go to other continents to do it now. So, hey, if you have an idea and you want to tell your story, drop us a note.
Let us know.
You can find us somehow. Until next time, then, bye-bye.